Hi, my name is Brian Cates. I'm an editor of documentaries and of fiction, and I'm just in love with this film, Among Neighbors, that Yoav, you directed and that Aaron and Lauren, you edited. I saw it in New York at its theatrical run, partially because I was on my way to Poland and Ukraine on a similar routes trip like the ones in the movie, and I wanted to see other people's experience with the same kind of event. But what I found was a fabulously engrossing, beautifully structured and film with incredible storytelling. I think it's cinematic. I think that it's full of surprises. It's full of intrigue and beautiful craft. And I wanted to meet you, and it turns out that I get to meet all of you, which is really wonderful. Can you tell me how each of you got involved and at what stage? Or maybe Yoav, you begin and just tell me a little bit about the origin of the project um, and um, and the development of it.
Sure, sure. It all began in 2014 when I was invited to go to Poland to film the rededication of a cemetery there. And this is in a town that used to be about two-thirds Jewish residents. And of course, now there were none. And I went ahead and kind of accepted this, what I thought was going to be a little side gig, to document this ceremony. But also, my kind of filmmaker instinct just told me, let me get myself more footage than just that, so I can put this ceremony in context. And I decided to interview whatever old people I could find in this little tiny town in Poland. And in interviewing these elders and asking them, do you remember when Jews were your neighbors? Of course, before World War II, uh, the thing that really leapt out and struck me was one of these old women told me that Jews were murdered in this town after the war, 6 months after World War II was over, and it was supposedly peacetime, and these Holocaust survivors came back only to be killed by their Polish neighbors. And that just really shook me and struck me as very different than the Holocaust stories and films and books I'd heard and read. And even though I had some resistance myself to, making a quote unquote Holocaust film, it just seemed so different and kind of haunting that at a time when the Nazis were defeated and it was supposedly peacetime, that this kind of tragedy could occur. And so I just realized this town has this dark and horrible secret. And at the same time, I had heard all these wonderful stories from these elders about, yes, we used to play with our Jewish friends and we loved visiting the Jewish shops. And it was such a contrast, that colorful, vibrant life that once had existed in this town, and then this horrible crime that occurred after the war. So that was the genesis of me saying, okay, this needs to be a film, not just a side project. And I dove in and started researching more and really trying to craft what at that point was going to be a short film, like a half-hour
Hmm.
film. But of
Wow.
course, there were other major developments that came up along the way, and I can talk about those in a minute. But to sort of maybe jump ahead a little and introduce Aaron and Lauren, um, the the two major developments that occurred were essentially the discovery of two really significant individuals, an eyewitness to those crimes, and then a Holocaust survivor who managed to survive those crimes, as well as the Holocaust itself. And that just made the story so much more layered and complex. And of course, it grew in length. And to manage all that over the years that followed, and it ended up being a 10-year process in all, I needed help. And so first I turned to Aaron, who I knew from the very beginning of my documentary career, and he was the first editor I ever worked with. And he's had a great career since then. And then subsequently, I worked with Lauren, who I came into contact with through the Crypt Camp team, and some other mutual colleagues here in the Bay Area. I saw her film as she was coming out of the Berkeley Journalism School and was really impressed by it and remembered it. And then when we connected again later, I thought, oh, this is a great person to work with and help me with this kind of mammoth task of telling this story.
Um, that's um, that's incredible how long it took, but it's not surprising given how complicated and layered the story is. I love Kirk Kemp, by the way, Lauren, I should say. I'm a big fan. Um, and Aaron, all of your work as well. I've known Aaron since prior to this film. I guess what I'm curious about from the editors is, did you have a suspicion that this film would need additional material to make the story, to enrich the story? Were you already in process of getting that material, or like how much did you have to write with Yoav to figure out what threads were missing and what threads needed to be amplified?
Well, I think, one of you have kind of talked about this a little bit, but one of the most interesting parts of this project is that it sort of got reborn multiple times, and it really changed radically each time because of it. And so I think the first kind of big transformation was when Yoav discovered Pelagia and found that, wow, here is this eyewitness, this Polish woman who was a little girl, when this happened, and she was really ready to tell her story. And because the people, she had been keeping it to herself, but the people who had committed the crime had finally all passed away, and she was really wanted to tell this story. And I think that was that was the sort of first kind of, I think big turning point in terms of transforming from this sort of smaller idea to the feature project. And then I think also, this idea, Yoav came up with a really great idea of, and I remember at what point in the process, Yoav, did the
Was
animation idea come in?
Animation
Yeah,
was really 2018.
yeah,
So about 4 years
four
into the
years in. Okay.
project and 3 years into kind of wrestling with
Mm.
Pelagia's story, which, as Aaron said, it came out of her with a lot of urgency because she had been repressing it for 70 years
Yeah.
and had been threatened by the killers herself. So finally, once she heard they passed away, it was it was like something opened up, the floodgates opened up for her soul, and the story just came kind of pouring out of her, not in chronological order, in Polish. So
Yeah.
it was kind of like a puzzle to then bring that footage to the US and have it translated and sort of start putting it in the appropriate sequences, based on, okay, this is pre-war, okay, this is early during the war, this is near the
Hmm.
end of the war, and then we could really see her full arc, how she knew this family so well, how she was in love with the son, how she really just admired the family as a whole,
Hmm.
and then was the eyewitness to these murders. And eventually, after, a few years of working on that, toiling kind of on my own, I realized, okay, I need help to tell the story, and the audience needs a way to track this girl and her story. And
Hmm.
so the animation initially was a sort of a test, and we did a test screening in 2018 in Berkeley to just kind of try out the animation, and the audience really gravitated towards it and
They
said,
really responded to it. It was like everybody was like, "Oh
How
my
could you
gosh,
say?
the animation, the animation, the
Mm.
animation." And I think, I think the best part of it is that, you know, instead of just using generic kind of B-roll footage, and that maybe people have already seen before, from the time period, or just using kind of generic, Poland B-roll footage. Pelagia's stories were so specific, it's like, for instance, she got this piece of fabric, from the family, and it meant so much to her. And so you want to be able to see that. You want to be able to see her as a little girl and see her with this fabric. And I think another thing that Yoav came up with, which was brilliant, which was to sort of take the animation to the next level, was to not be literal about it. So, for instance, this, fabric becomes, it transforms and it moves and it becomes this kind of living, breathing thing because, eventually later on in life, she turns it into a dress that she wears. And so Yoav was like, yeah, let's not be too literal. Let's get kind of a little bit magical, with this and a little bit more poetic, more symbolic. And, you see the mother's, the protective wings of the mother, and I think that creates so much more emotion. So this sort of getting back, long answer to your question of like, how do we bring in what are the pieces that we needed to tell the story? That was a really big one because you could tell the story in this really emotional and poetic and really cinematic way that makes the audience feel so much more than just some generic, B-roll from the time period.
It's poetry. I mean, it's exactly what you said. As I was watching the movie, I thought, well, this is great for exposition, but it's so much more than exposition. I mean, that's the very
Because it's
basic.
emotional, it's meaningful, it's personal,
And
right?
and it's associative because the angel wings and the blue dress is just for two examples. And but also like what you do with space and time when you can transition into the future and back through a visual language that you can create whole cloth because it's a construction, but it's also very beautiful artwork. So it never feels like it's just illustrating or creating a visual testimony for something that didn't have a visual. It always feels like it's alive and more interesting than that. Speaking of your main character, the moment that she's asked, who have you told this story to before, and she answers, you're the first one. I might be getting the
That's
exact
right. That's right.
correct. Um, it's such a breathtaking moment um, that came out of seemingly out of nowhere. I didn't expect that would be the answer, and it really did take my breath away. I was wondering, A, did you suspect that was what her answer was going to be? And B, um, once you knew, did you feel like you had a particular kind of responsibility as not just people um, telling the character story, but also influencing the story because you're, in a sense, you're players in this drama. And I don't know if that made you feel an extra responsibility um,
Oh yeah,
that's unusual in a
absolutely. I
documentary.
mean, we did not know in advance that we were the first ones she was telling the story to. It sort of came out during the process that this is why she's coming forward now because the killer's passed away. She sort of mentioned that in the context of telling her story. And that certainly was a huge burden to realize, okay, this woman has waited her entire life to
Mm.
deliver this eyewitness account of these murders that she saw, that she clearly was traumatized by, and she's looking for some measure of justice or change or redemption or accountability. And obviously, there's going to be a limit to what's possible because it's a lifetime later. But she really wanted to leave a record.
Mhm.
She really wanted it known. This is what happened. And she was hoping to find the son of two of the victims. This is the boy she knew as a child, and she
Mhm.
knew that he had managed to survive at least that incident, but she didn't know, did he make it out of Poland alive? What became of him? And this was clearly she kind of lay down the gauntlet, and this is my final mission in life. I want to find this out. I want to leave this record. I need help. And we, the film team, ended up being a huge part of that help to take her record in and to search for answers around what happened.
Hmm. I mean, it's an incredible privilege and also kind of scary that that you're kind of creating evidence through the work, which is very unusual, but also speaks to the power of oral history, of documentary evidence, and also of editing, because you're telling parallel stories that may be related to one another. I don't want to give it too much away, but there are connections, and the way that you cut the film affects the way that the audience receives the meaning of how these stories are connected. So I'd love to know more about how, without giving too much away, how the sequencing of those events developed. Maybe Lauren, you'd like to talk about, um, I don't know, the flow, the story flow, the flow of information, and how to, to make the audience curious without giving too much away, so that there's a question that remains at the end of every scene that gets picked up, you know, sometimes right away, sometimes you have to wait for it. I think that's sort of the most powerful thing editing can do, is plant a seed that gets answered in a way that's inevitable and yet somehow unexpected. And the movie does that beautifully.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that is a lot of the work that we did, Yoav, once I came on because, it was quite a long cut when I joined the project. I think it was like 3 hours. So we had to take a lot out, which then necessitated sort of revisiting and rethinking the order of everything that was left. So, we did a lot of work with a Miro board, digital index cards, moving things
Mhm.
around. And I think really just trying what happens if we put this here? What happens if we put that there? How does this handoff feel? Is this, like you're saying, sort of like hinting at a connection or a relation without giving too much away, maintaining the sense of curiosity, making sure we weren't spending so much time with one character's story that it was jarring when we moved to somebody else.
Hmm.
That was definitely something that, as fresh eyes, I could tell you, like, I resent being pulled out of the story of this person in this moment. But when we do it here, it feels really good. So, yeah, I think it was just a lot of experimentation and trial and error to see what felt the best and what felt like the right balance.
Did you test screen often?
Um, I'm trying to remember.
No, I don't. We really didn't. We, in terms of our test screenings, was mostly ourselves. With the three of us, eventually there was a point where like Aaron hadn't seen things in a while because Aaron worked primarily in 2020 for about
Hmm.
5 straight months of editing. And to kind of give an overview, I would say Aaron's phase was this kind of expansive phase of the project where I was like, I would make suggestions. How about we have a scene where they give us a tour of the firehouse that used to be the synagogue because we have that footage. And Aaron said, yes, yes, try it, let's see, And so everything was essentially a yes and as I was working with Aaron, and we built this 3 hour movie as a result, and it was quite good. And I toyed with the idea of, oh, could this be like 4 45-minute episodes of a limited series? But that would have really taken, getting a platform to really buy into that. And so eventually, um, I made the decision, we can't wait for that. Let's make this the best movie it can be. And so then later on, when Lauren was working with me, she knew from the get-go, okay, we've got to get this nearly 3 hours down to something more like an hour and 40 minutes.
Hmm.
And so, we had the overarching goal of, okay, it's got to get tighter, it's got to get shorter. But at the same time, that didn't mean, you know, the only thing Lauren's going to do is cut and trim. There was a lot of reordering, as she was mentioning, restructuring, and even looking at, hey, there's this footage over here that nobody's touched. Maybe this should be brought in. Um, and so like there was a really nice verite moment that she found that's sort of comes just before the climax in the film that just added a little humor and levity with an interaction with Pelagia where
I
she
think I know the
jokes
one.
about it was the first time we see her with white hair and she jokes about it. She sort of says that she was now dyeing her hair white when of course the opposite is true. But she's just sort of being a little playful and coy, and it's really adorable
And it
and
always
makes us
gets laughs in
laugh.
screenings.
Yeah, it always gets a laugh in the screenings, and then we're heading towards a much more serious moment right after that. And I always love that sort of alternating emotion um, in the storytelling, and that was something both Aaron and Lauren were really mindful of. This, of course, the with the story set in World War II and going through the Holocaust and then extending after. Of course, there's going to be some heavy scenes and some tragic moments, but we didn't want to sort of pummel our audience with, tragedy after tragedy. And luckily and fortunately in this story there is hope and there is beauty. And so we would try to pace things so that we could alternate and really give our audience's hearts a break or even a something uplifting, so that they would kind of be guessing not only intellectually about where's the plot going and how is he going to survive this, but also just emotionally, like, oh my gosh, I've been brought so low and now I'm hopeful again, and that kind of rising and falling that leads to a satisfying cinematic experience.
But it also amplifies those emotions when you can do tonal shifts that are effective. Um, it's like you don't want a ride that only goes up and barely goes down. Like you want your roller coaster to to have all the thrills. And it is a bit of a thriller, which is why it's kind of amazing to me that it also has such a soulful beauty and a kind of stateliness, and also it has a lot of information. And that's another question I have is you managed um, to tell several characters inter overlapping stories, but you also managed to give a general overview of the state of Holocaust education in Poland, which is very vexed. Um, and you also managed to talk about um, ethnic nationalism globally in Poland, but also elsewhere. And none of those other threads, which are more expositional, feel like it. Maybe it's because they're concise. Maybe it's because your score is very, very good and makes you feel like you're along for the ride for those moments. But maybe you can talk a little bit about how much information that was not directly related to the characters you needed and what went in and what went out, and how did you decide what would sort of boost up the character's story with context?
Sure. I think Lauren and I worked on that kind of near the end of production. And I interviewed a lot of experts to try to find the right ones. So there's at least twice as many experts that we actually interviewed as end up in the film. And Lauren made the decision with me. We don't want too many different people to kind of keep track of. If you have a historian and a journalist
Yeah.
and a rabbi, maybe that's about enough, but we also wanted to cover some basic context around the history of Jews in Poland. We needed to sum up really 900 years of shared history and keep the story moving and manage to convey to the audience that Jewish and Polish culture was intertwined and largely symbiotic, and yet there was anti-Semitism all along the way,
Yeah.
so that when it does finally surface in this really horrible way in the aftermath of World War II, it's not coming out of left field. It's something that's kind of been planted and been under the surface all along. And, what the Nazis did sort of unleashed it. But we, in the end, fortunately, with Konstanty, who's a Polish journalist, Rabbi Shudrich, who's the chief rabbi of Poland, we had a lot of good material to work with, and I really let Lauren sort of take the reins there, and it was fun for me to sort of see her get excited and just come back to me and say, oh my God, I love Constantine, the way he expresses things and things like that. I mean, Lauren, maybe you want to just give your take
Yeah.
on processing that.
Well, I was just thinking about the facet of it that we found that having using the talking heads, the historians who are Polish, as opposed to some of the other folks you found who were subject matter experts but who were not Polish, didn't work as well. Having this history told by Polish historians and all of them also had a very personal connection to the material as well. And sometimes we just barely touched into that, like Dariush saying he was fired from the Poland Museum for insisting on telling this history as it actually was. I think really made it feel like they were connected to the story and they weren't just sort of like popping in with information. They were emotionally connected to it, and I think that that also made a huge difference. And yeah, it was just also a matter of who's compelling on camera. I mean, that's always going to be a part of it as well. So yeah.
Right. I mean, even Constantine, I think it was Constantine, who's not directly related to the story, sometimes just a great soundbite, like his soundbite that Polish people have a phantom limb, which is the Jews, and Jews have a phantom limb, which is Poland, is such a profound way of thinking about that even though he's not a character in the movie, really, he's a talking head. That made me emotional just by the sheer weight of the words. So
Right. Right.
beautifully,
And
beautifully chosen. Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason that he can say something like that is because of his personal connection to the subject matter, and even if it's not necessarily that he was personally involved in the story, he sort of was because he's personally involved in the history of Jews in Poland, and in his own work and trying to tell the truth about that. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, and his way of speaking, he's a writer as well, right? You can tell.
yeah, he's very
Uh,
eloquent.
It's very
yeah.
eloquent.
And the
Yeah.
the amazing thing about that soundbite, like when he said in the interview, Jews have their Polish phantom pains and Poles have their Jewish phantom pains. And unless there's a way you can get those two phantom limbs to actually shake, we're going to be taking painkillers forever because this pain won't go away. And in a way, he was sort of saying, issuing this as a challenge, like somehow you have to get these two communities that have disassociated from one another to reunite and to connect. And it seemed like an impossible task. He even said, I don't know how you get phantom limbs to shake hands, but somehow you have to do it.
Yeah.
And he said that at a time when it totally sounded impossible. And yet, the way the story unfolded and the way we were able to build this film to a climax that I won't reveal, I think we did accomplish something that feels like that moment of these two disconnected communities finding something very powerful in common, something that feels almost like destined,
Yeah.
but that was very much against the odds for it all to come together the way it did.
Wow. I mean, well, great drama, I think, does feel like a kind of destiny. I mean, as I said before, when you hurl toward a conclusion that feels inevitable and yet surprising, I think you've done some of the greatest work that you could do as storytellers. And um, I felt that very strongly in this movie. several times, but I also didn't feel like there were too many endings or that it wasn't concise. It was really just breathtaking. Is there anything else you'd like to add about what you hope the film, um, what its footprint is in the world, or how it affected your own lives, and your careers even, in terms of how you feel about your own craft?
Uh, I guess I'll say, for me, um, two things. One is I really invite and implore people to see the film, and I recognize fully that people feel like they've seen every possible Holocaust related story. And please just trust us. This is very significantly different. It's really the heart of the film, in a way, or the most tragic chapter is actually a post-Holocaust story. And it just looks at this uh, chapter of history through a totally different lens. It's not about what the Germans did to the Jews. It's really about the centuries of relationships between Polish Jews and Polish Christians who coexisted for so long, and those relationships went through incredible tests, and in some areas and ways and incidents they passed those tests, and in other ways they tragically failed. But it certainly is an underexamined part of history, and we worked really hard to bring history to life through animation in a really unique and powerful way in this film. And then, in response to your other question about how it affected me personally, I had no idea that um, what I would end up doing in part through this film was almost like therapy or spiritual work with these elders whose stories were entrusted to us, the film team. And we were able to give each of them, this Polish eyewitness to murder and this Holocaust survivor, a piece in their life that they were aching for, and that there were wounds that were decades and decades old that needed something additional for healing and completion. And we really gave that to these individuals, and that is sometimes overwhelming to experience and talk about. But I'm grateful. I certainly didn't set out to do that, but I'm grateful that through the serendipity of this whole process that it led to all of that.
Well, as an audience member, I'm grateful you did it as well. And I think that it is that moving because it was moving for you, the filmmakers. So thank you.